Finger guns in the house. Hello, everybody. There's been a steady stream of stories coming out over the last several months relating to potential corruption involving President Biden and his son Hunter. It appears as though we might be reaching a tipping point when it comes to this, as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy opened up an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. How likely is this to go anywhere? Will this dredge out even more information? Will this have an impact on the election? We're going to be talking about all of this and more on episode 415 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I usually don't make a big deal about this, but tomorrow is my birthday, and I officially enter my mid-50s. So even though I am equally as older than you, as I always will be, tomorrow I will feel just a little bit older than you guys, even more so.
Oh, well, happy birthday in advance, Jim. Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo. He is the editorial director at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
Doing good. I want to wish Jim a early happy birthday. And I'm sorry to say this, but we do our Survivor League. We got, everyone picks one team, one NFL team. And once you pick that team, you can't pick them again. And Jim actually lost in week 1.
Oh,
wow.
First time ever.
Wow.
I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah. And also joining us, we
Picking
have
the Minnesota Vikings. Man, what a bad idea.
Oh, I never should have picked them. I never picked. They've knocked me out of more Survivor polls than any other NFL team. They stink.
Also, we've got Justin Haskins with us. He is the... Oh, wait, no, he's not. He's still gallivanting over there in Europe. I think I saw a picture of him wearing a beret, if you believe that or not. I think he's meeting up with Klaus Schwab over there. I'm not entirely sure. Those are just the rumors going around on X. So you believe it or you don't. I don't know. That's up to you.
Yeah, we're not going to believe that one.
Audio only listeners, we've got I got that message I always say to you that are probably watching the show on a Friday or later listening to the show. First off, why don't you leave a review for us on iTunes? That'd be greatly appreciated. Also, you can join us a day earlier where we are live streaming this show at noon Central Time on Facebook and Rumble and YouTube and Twitter. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can also support us by doing that super chat functionality. We have that enabled. Guarantee that you will have your comment or question read on the air while also supporting the show. And you could also support the show by not spending $1 and just by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to bring up right off the bat. Oh, yes. That is the fact that we do have a Davos watch. I have a Davos watch segment prepared for the end of the show. So make sure you watch all the way through the end for that segment. But gentlemen, we're done with the benefit dinner, so we don't have to pitch that every week now. I think it went pretty well. We had a couple of fans. I had a couple of fans come up to me. Bill for one, Mark for another, Daniel Robin for another. Oh, I just blasted out your real name. Whatever. I think there was a couple of other ones that I did not get to meet. Somebody was telling me about somebody else that came up to them, but I don't think I was able to interact with them. But I wanted to thank all of those that came up and gave us support and said that they watched the show and all of that. I really appreciate it. Gentlemen, great. Any last words about that or the benefit dinner or anything like that?
No, the benefit dinner was great, and it was fun. There were probably almost a dozen regular listeners who came up to me and mentioned that they love the show and really appreciate the fact that we're out here every week. I think somebody in the comments just today mentioned that, what is this? This is In the Tank number 412? 15. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of weekly shows. I mean, we didn't start live streaming this until about show 180 or something like that, maybe. I don't know. That's when we started doing it on YouTube. But we've had more than 400 episodes of this show every single week, talking about news of the day and how it applies to the principles that the Heartland Institute is pushing for, which is smaller government, more individual liberty, and the fight to preserve it. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's to 415 more. We'll see how it goes. But so a lot of things I want to get to. Like I said, there's the Biden stuff that we're going to talk about. We've got the Davos Watch segment towards the end. Maybe we're going to squeak in another topic. But before we get into any of that, the Socialism 2023 conference took place in Chicago earlier this month. Chris, did you go to that?
No, unfortunately, I was not invited.
Oh, I think they would have allowed you. You might have had to put in a fake name or something like that. But
Put on a wig, yeah.
You missed out on some great informational panels and lectures. I might inform you. You might be remiss now that I tell you what you forgot when you didn't go. But some of the panels included Kids as Comrades, which discussed the best practices in developing socialist programming for kids. You missed Resisting the Traditional Wife Turn, which sought to combat the emerging pro-family, pro-labor agenda that casts abortion, feminism, and sexual liberty as neoliberal capitalist innovations which exploit women. Aren't you so upset that you missed that one?
No.
Or, maybe you can get this one in recording, because I'm sure you wanted to watch this one. Family Abolition Today, which advocated for replacing the family with a plethora of government programs. The panel included Sophie Lewis, who promotes surrogacy as a means of eradicating natural family relationships. So, Chris, after hearing those, are you psyched to go to next year's?
I can't wait. Especially because, it actually sounds a lot like this was the BLM agenda, because this is, remember before they, erased their website and they took away all their anti-family propaganda and all their, basically pro-communist, pro-Marxist propaganda. So this actually seems like it was cut and pasted right off of the BLM website circa 2020, right after those, all those peaceful riots, Donnie.
Yeah, well, apparently this is a thing, the whole destroying the family thing. And I was just talking to Chris before we hit go on this, and I was saying that I think we, under the Socialism Research Center, should do more work on this. And separately from this story that I'm talking about, I was sent an article. Now, granted, this is a couple of years old article. It was published by The Atlantic, but the title is "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake," and the subhead was, "The family structure we've held up as a cultural ideal for the past half century has been a catastrophe for many. It's time to figure out a better way to live together." Authored by David Brooks. So that's this is in the academic zeitgeist when it comes to socialist beliefs, and I think,
but here's the thing, and Donnie, you're well aware of this, and Jim, you're well aware of this. Almost every major socialist regime in human history has tried to drive a wedge between children and their families. So we talk about like Hitler Youth and trying to get little kids in Nazi Germany to tattle on their parents if they were saying bad things about the regime. Stalin did the same thing. Mao did the same thing. Castro's done the same thing. Every single
communist, it's in the Communist Manifesto,
right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to replace the family with the state, and the state has to be above the family. So in order to do that, you need to drive a wedge between the family and the child, and the child is malleable. The child is able to be brainwashed, and through the use of propaganda, they are able to to be malleable to the degree that they can believe the lies that the state is like pushing. And I think what we're seeing is and I'm a former school teacher. I've seen some of this stuff in the classroom, and we were sitting here, we're laughing at it, but it's happening in classrooms across the country. And I mean, I left the teaching profession 5 years ago, and I can guarantee you that this was happening at all the middle schools and high schools that I was teaching at 5 or so years ago. And I can only expect that it's gotten way worse since then. And I also think this is, I know this is probably going to get us, on the YouTube ban list here, but part of what happened during the pandemic was to try to isolate the children away from the parents by, telling them, you can't go to school, but all this stuff, you have to, use remote learning and all that. But I do think to some degree that there's a silver lining and that backfired, because it also caused some parents to actually say, wait a second, what's going on in these classrooms? Because I think most parents, for the most part, thought, okay, my kids are going to school, they're going to learning the ABCs, arithmetic, science, and all that kind of stuff. And then when they saw what was really going on, it did, expose their agenda. And what we've seen in the past couple of years since the school shutdowns, and since what was going on in the curriculum was exposed, we've seen a lot more homeschooling. We've seen a lot more micro schools, and we've seen a lot more parents want to put their kids in non-public schools. So I think this does have a teeny bit of a blessing. However, I'm still afraid, because when I see these things, and when I see going on in the classroom curriculum, because this is not just at this conference, this is happening in curricula across the country, especially in middle schools, because those are even, those kids are even more vulnerable to this kind of crap. It's taking shape. And I think that it's something that we need to make sure we're working against, and we can't fall into that trap of, hey, if we're, saying, the transgender stuff going on in schools is a part of the culture war. It's not just that it's part of the culture war, it's also part about maintaining the nuclear family. Parents have the right to to deem what their kids are learning about in school, not teachers unions and not government. Very, very important.
Yeah, as Chris was talking, Andy has been scrolling through the actual listing of panels at the Socialism 2023 conference to prove that I wasn't making those panels up. And while he's doing it, I could see that Jim is just reading them off as he goes along and shaking his head furiously. But Jim, did you see that one of the days started with yoga in the morning, and then ended, the events ended with a radical drag show in the evening? I feel like if we tried to make a parody of a socialist conference, I don't think we'd come up with half as good as material as what's actually on their site right now.
Yeah, I know. One of the things on the program, for those of you just listening to this and not seeing it, one of them I think was resisting carceral sanism or some sanism. It's like, what is that? I have no idea what that is, but there are plenty of panels talking about what you just talked about, Chris, the destruction of the family. It's a driving theme through here, and it's separating children, because children in a socialist Marxist society, you don't own yourself. You don't have any autonomy. So naturally, children do not. Parents do not have autonomy. They don't have ownership of their children. In fact, it would be wrong. It would be wrong to allow parents to raise kids, because how could we be sure that they would be raised with the proper socialist values that we need to indoctrinate people with in order to sustain a socialist Marxist society? I shared a video with Donnie earlier this week from a podcast called Triggernometry. Triggernometry. It's hosted by two British men. One of them, I believe, is a comedian. They might both be comedians. They've been red pilled, it seems, over the last several years. And one of the men was born in the Soviet Union, so he's very much anti-socialism, anti-Marxism. And to their credit, they had on their program very recently an avowed Marxist, and they wanted him to explain and make the case for Marxism and socialism and why that would be a better system. And of course, he just waves with a wave of the hand and a little aside. He says, well, as they challenge him, saying, well, where it's been tried, it hasn't really worked out very well for human beings, especially the millions and millions of human beings who have been murdered by those socialist and Marxist regimes because they did not want to go along with collectivism. Because in a Marxist socialist society, nothing is more important than the state. Not your own life, not the life of your children. You must sacrifice everything for the good of the state, for the greater good. And it struck me that, and one of the panels here was about blaming capitalism for COVID-19, apparently, or something like that. But how, it kind of struck me that COVID in the year 2020, and I should say government response to COVID in 2020 was kind of like we got to see what a Marxist society would be like in super fast forward. Because first we got the smiling face of collectivism, right? We're all going to do our part to stop the spread. 2 weeks to stop the spread. We should all do our part. And people voluntarily looked at that smiling face of collectivism and said, okay, yeah, just this once. This seems pretty serious. You said this is a very deadly virus and easily spread, so we'll do our best. But then that was a lie. It was never 2 weeks to stop the spread. Even Deborah Birx even admitted, I believe, in her own autobiography or her own book about COVID, that they always knew it was not going to just be 2 weeks. So it all started with a lie, because Marxists always lie. It's lies all the way down. And then soon in COVID, we were asked to stay inside. We need to stay inside. And in fact, people voluntarily did that. But before too long, people were being arrested for going outside. So this smiling face of collectivism and doing it all for your fellow man turned into arresting paddleboarders out 500 yards off of shore, or putting police tape around playgrounds, and arresting parents who take their children to play outside because after weeks and weeks they just can't stand to be inside anymore. Business owners were asked to put in place things to protect the public. And then before long, that smiling face of collectivism and just doing it all for your fellow American turned into closing businesses down that were deemed by government bureaucrats to be not essential. That means your corner grocery store had to close down, or your corner shop did, your small business. But Walmart and the big grocery chains, they're allowed to remain open because the government decided this. And on it goes. So Marxism and socialism, when you see these sorts of things, and it's very disconcerting that parents would bring their children to this, that there's so much focus on teaching children the wonders of socialism, and obviously without teaching them any of the downsides, which is what this channel in particular and the Heartland Institute in general is really working toward. That's why we have something called the Socialism Research Center. It's not to research how great socialism is, it's actually to tell the truth about socialism. But there is no aspect of your life that they will not deem that they have the power to control. And again, we saw this in fast forward in COVID. Congressman John Lewis gets a lavish funeral with nobody wearing masks in a beautiful church. George Floyd gets 4 funerals in public with nobody wearing masks. But you can't have a funeral for your father if he passed away. And in fact, he may have passed away in a nursing home without the ability for anybody in his family to comfort him in his last days. That is the snarling, evil face of true Marxism and collectivism and socialism. And to see these sorts of things, I really do actually wish I heard about this convention or whatever in Chicago earlier, because I would have liked to have gone, undercover and really report back. Maybe do some secret videos. We will definitely, if there's another one of these in Chicago again, we definitely have to go, because this kind of stuff needs to be exposed. And because down this path is great misery and death.
Yeah, no, I think they do it every year, and I think we should definitely plan for next year. Usually they host it around July. This one was a little bit later in the year for whatever reason. I don't know. But on one hand, I feel like this conference, is not like a big deal, and it's funny. We could laugh at it. And it's just like anyone could put on a conference and get like 100 people to attend. And like you look at the crowd of these people, and we've played video from past conferences, and it's it's like 100 crazy people. So it's like hard to really take them too seriously. However, there are a number of notable speakers that give far too much credibility to this absurd circus clown show. There's a number of professors that represent various colleges. Naomi Klein was there. Emily Drabinsky, who is the president of the American Library Association and a self-described Marxist lesbian, who explained at one point during the conference that public schools and local libraries need to be a site of socialist organizing. So it's like, I feel like, I can make a case that you could dismiss this as just a bunch of lunatics, but on the same side, or on the other side of that coin, it's like, I don't know, like this is actually getting attention of people that have influence, in the world or whatever. So yeah, it's, to me, it's crazy, but we should also kind of pay attention to what their rhetoric is.
Yeah, I mean, look, the concept of liberty can be summed up in one word: no. If you don't have the ability to say no, then you're not free. And everything about that entire schedule is about compelling the entire society to do what a small number of elites demand must be done in order to have a good, a good world, or whatever excuses they have. It's really just a PR campaign for a power grab for a global elite. But if you can't say no, you're not free.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we're 20 minutes in. We got to go to our main topic here. So just days ago, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he's launching an impeachment inquiry against President Biden. In a statement on Tuesday, McCarthy said House investigators into the investigations into the Biden family have already uncovered a, quote, culture of corruption that demands deeper review. McCarthy said he will direct the chairman of the House Judiciary, Oversight and Ways and Means Committees to lead the inquiry. Democrats, on the other hand, are saying that there is no evidence. In fact, Chuck Schumer referred to the calls for an inquiry as absurd, and that, quote, the American people want us, Congress, to do something that will make their lives better, not go off on these chases and witch hunts. After he said that, he burst into flames due to extreme irony, but that's besides the point. So, Chris, I don't get it. I mean, I feel like we've talked about a lot of this stuff in regards to Biden over the past several months, whether it's the Hunter Biden emails or this witness testimony, recovered text messages. Even the FBI came out with some stuff. So does that not amount to evidence? Maybe at least a little smoke? What's your take on all this?
Okay, I've got many, many different thoughts, some very conflicting thoughts on this. So, first of all, I don't want impeachment to just become something that is wielded by every single Congress just to get the sitting president out of the job. So, I don't want this to be, to become just a mechanism, just a tool used by the other party, which is what I'm afraid that it's going to become. Donnie, we've had, more than a couple hundred years of Congress and the president, working together. And only a handful of times has Congress gone to the level of impeachment. Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and then Donald Trump a bunch of times, and now maybe President Biden. So I think that this is just kind of a dangerous road to even go down. On the issue at stake, whether or not this rises to impeachment, impeachment is supposed to be for high crimes, treason, and misdemeanors. Okay. What President Biden is accused of doing is he's accused of, doing these shady business deals, but he wasn't president at the time. So also, I don't know if this really would apply to his, current, standing as president. So, I mean, there's half of me that says, don't do this, please. This is, kind of just like a dog and pony show for the American people, just to, say, hey, we're fighting the good fight and, all that kind of stuff. But then there's another side of me that says, well, wait a second. There is a lot of stuff that Congress needs to be doing. We've got, the budget coming up here in a couple of weeks. We're going to be, needing to pass a budget. There's a bunch of other things that Congress, should be working with. And I just don't know if this rises to that level. So I feel that, right now we're sitting in late 2023. We're on the cusp of yet another election season. And I think that already the process of governing they've said, no, we're not going to really be interested in that. And now it's all about, 2024 election. And I'm really of, different minds on this one.
Oh, interesting. So, I thought for sure Chris was going to be like, hell yeah, Kevin McCarthy, bring the impeachment to him. But interesting. Jim, what was your reaction? Similar to Chris? Different?
Chris. You live in a world that no longer exists. You have this notion of how our government should operate, and you have fallen into the trap of holding on to that fantasy and in the false hope that if our side just plays by the rules, if we're nice, then the other side will stop trying to destroy this country and destroy everybody who is not a radical leftist Democrat who happens to accidentally get elected into office in an election that wouldn't be rigged. So it is a long past time. I am done. Frankly, I am done with that kind of mindset. That Mitt Romney type, and he's just going to retire now. We just learned yesterday or this morning he's going to retire. That Mitt Romney, George W. Bush kind of mindset. Those days are over. And if you are going to sit back, and you actually made some great points, Chris. These are things that Joe Biden did while he was vice president. And I have little doubt that all of these allegations, or at least most of them, would turn out to be true. He traded on his office while vice president of the United States to enrich himself and his family. The evidence is piling up higher than the Washington Monument that this is the case.
I agree.
So yeah, he wasn't president at the time, but that is high corruption in our government, and it cannot go unpunished. And if impeachment is the only way it's going to be punished, because the Justice Department is going to charge anybody in the Bidens with serious federal crimes. Are you kidding me? They tried to hide all of the crimes that Hunter Biden has committed, including violations of the FARA Act, which is where you have to register as an agent of a foreign country, if you're going to advocate for the interests of a foreign country. Donald Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, went to federal prison for a BS interpretation of that law.
I agree.
Hunter Biden should be behind bars right now. And if we are going to clean up this government, if we're going to have a government that's worthy of the people of the United States, this sort of thing cannot go unpunished. Joe Biden, and for the Democrats to say, I saw, you see it on Twitter, Democrat mouthpieces and the press. But again, I repeat myself, saying things like, impeachment should be reserved for serious times. It should be rare. You guys cheered the impeachment of Donald Trump over a phone call that a lifelong Ukrainian-born bureaucrat didn't like.
But
Jim, he got impeached over that. He got impeached after he was out of office.
Bolton wrote a whole book about that.
Yeah, so Donald Trump can be impeached when he's not president anymore. But Joe Biden is supposed to get off on this. He had the evidence, like I said, is piled as high as the Washington Monument. Joe Biden had private emails with the name Robert L. Peters, among others, in which he discussed his son Hunter Biden's business in Ukraine, and of course, how the Biden family can help. There are phone recordings, there are text messages, there are emails. There's the entire contents of the Hunter Biden laptop, which the deep state and the media kept the American people from knowing about before the election on purpose, so they could get Donald Trump out of office. So, Chris, the only way we are going to get back to a government and a policy and a politics and a society that is normal, like it used to be, all the way back in the times of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. The only way we're going to get there is if this side, our side, the side that is always under attack by the left and the government, fights back with the same tools that they have used against us this entire time. We are not going to win with both hands tied behind our back while our face keeps getting pounded by the system.
Well, here's the predicament that I'm in, and Donnie, I think you can empathize with this because we've had discussions about this, for years. I try to, have my principles, and don't let the ends justify the means. So when the Democrats were impeaching President Trump on grounds that I didn't think was, that didn't, rise to the level of impeachment, I'm not going to do the same things as to say, well, I want to get that guy. So I think that once again, in this situation, the charges as we know them do not rise to that level. And I don't want to get into a grudge match where it's like, well, we're going to do this and then they're going to do that. And then they take the nuclear option on the Senate and get rid of the filibuster. And then they pack the court. And I don't want to go down that road. I mean, you can call me naive. You can say that I'm looking through this with rose-colored glasses, but I still hope to some degree that in the future we can get back to some semblance of, the constitutional, restraints that our government has abided by for the past couple of 100 years. And I think that the more that we push that envelope, because they're obviously pushing it, but then if we're just saying, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're going to do it twice as hard. I think that we're just as bad as them. And I think that only accelerates the process of, undoing any constitutional, controls on how our government, acts. And I think that that's a lesson. I think that that's just, that is going to, make matters way worse, not better.
Okay, well, put aside whether or not you think this should happen, right?
Okay.
It looks like he already said, we're opening up an inquiry or whatever. Do you think it's going to go anywhere? Chris, you already kind of mentioned this being like a dog and pony show. I've heard other commentators say this sort of thing where it's like, yeah, they're just, Republicans are just trying to curry favor with their supporters before they sell them down the river when it comes to this budget talk that's coming in a couple of weeks. So do you think it's going to go anywhere?
Well, okay, so all he's done so far is launch an inquiry. This is not, we are not at the level of actually, the charges, being leveled yet. That's going to require an actual vote. I don't know if the Republicans even have enough to vote on to begin the impeachment process. And then let's say, even if they do, even if they kind of squeak by the, skin of their teeth on a, couple of votes, does anyone in their right mind think that the Senate would actually convict President Biden? No, of course not. So all this is going to do is just lead to, the Senate not convicting him, and President Biden can use this as somewhat of a win going into campaign season. But Donnie, I kind of do go back to the beginning. If we are outraged at them using the impeachment for political purposes, well, then I'm going to be somewhat outraged if we do it for the same, reason, even if those grounds are a little more justified based on the behaviors, because I still go back to that. He didn't do this while president. If this was all happening, in the past 2.5 years while he was in the Oval Office, I think obviously, but this goes back years and years in the past. And then that, I think, opens up a whole new Pandora's box of, let's say someone is, elected president, and then it's like, oh, well, 20 years ago, we found you did this, so therefore we're going to impeach you upon that. I think that is just not a road we want to go down at all.
I've got another point I want to make, but Jim, do you care to respond to Chris's assessment?
Make your point while I calm down.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, like I said,
I like this.
There's one commentator that I mentioned that thinks that this is just, like I said, just optics to win points on the Republican side. Another commentator that I was listening to that I very much enjoy is speculating that they think that this could be the excuse that Democrats need to move this increasingly losing it 85-year-olds before the general election comes up. Maybe get someone a little bit more fresh, someone like Michelle Obama or something like that in there. And which I can kind of buy that. I mean, did you guys see him doing his speech? A couple of different media appearances, speeches that he gave in Vietnam and all of that.
Well, I have one question. Are you alluding that the Democrats are working in tandem with the Republicans on this?
No, but this could just be the opportunity that they need.
Well, because I have seen in the past couple of days, especially since the Washington Post came out with an op-ed saying Joe Biden should not run again in 2024, that a lot of high-ranking Democrat officials and a lot of the talking heads on MSNBC and CNN are starting to discuss that possibility.
Interesting.
So I do find the timing sort of interesting. The fact that the impeachment inquiry comes up just as the chatter about, potentially replacing Joe Biden on the ticket starts to, get louder and louder and louder. However, I don't think that it's the Democrats working in tandem with the Republicans, because I don't think that they work in tandem on anything these days.
Right. Well, I want to. We have a couple of clips here of dear leader Biden, so I want to go ahead and play just to kind of show you the current state of the president in question, because we've talked for the past couple of years, I should say, about the decline of Joe Biden, and it's been kind of ridiculous, but it's getting just absurd at this point. Jim, you've got two clips lined up for us. Which one do you want to play first?
I don't know. Let's do the
they're both equally bad. I want to play both of them.
They're both equally bad. All right, we'll play. These are let's just call these highlights from President Biden's super successful trip to Vietnam at the G20 summit. Here we go.
Okay, go ahead.
Did you ever think you'd be sitting at a G20 conference where everyone was preoccupied with the notion of global warming? Not a joke. Did you ever think that? And there's my brother loves there's famous lines from movies that he always quotes, and one of them is there's a movie about John Wayne. He's an Indian scout, and they're trying to get I think it was Apache, one of the great tribes of America, back on the reservation, and he's standing with the Union, so they're all on they're on their horses and their saddles, and there's 3 or 4 Indians in headdresses, and the Union soldiers. And the Union soldiers basically saying to the Indians, "Come with me, we'll take care of you, everything will be good." And the Indian looks at John Wayne and points to the Union soldier and says, "He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier." Well, there's a lot of lion, dog-faced pony soldiers out there about global warming, but not anymore. All of a sudden, they're all realizing it's a problem. And there's nothing like seeing the light. I see, I'm just following my orders here.
Okay, so he's in Vietnam delivering this speech. No one in the crowd knows what he's talking about, at all. At least now we've got the origin of the lying dog-faced pony soldier line that he used during his campaign. So that's one plus from the speech there. But that's not even the worst of it. But if you have a comment, throw it in there, Jim. But I do want to play the other clip.
We'll play the other clip. But I mean, I'm glad I finally know the full story behind the dog-faced pony soldier line that he
told it in length
out all the time, that he pulled out on the campaign trail and shouting it at his own supporters during the primaries. So that's whatever. But actually, and the reason it was as kind of long at the end is because I saved it for when he's just kind of losing where he's at and what's going on, and I'm just following orders here. Now, just real quick to bring it back to why he should be impeached, and one of our fantastic viewers here on YouTube said, Chris, about impeachment. He said, "Chris, let me correct you. We were against it for Trump because it was false and made up. In the case of Biden, it is here and now and ongoing. Biden sold himself and evaded paying taxes." When he says at the end of that, "I'm just following orders here," sometimes I wonder if he's just talking about his handlers that are actually running the country and not him. He's just a bumbling figurehead of the Mr. Magoo of the socialist left presidency that we have here. But his son was doing business with the Communist Chinese Party, with businessmen who are just CCP operatives. He went on Air Force Two with his dad to China at least once, probably several times. And so we need to get down to the bottom of how much the Biden family is involved in basically using his influence while he was in office to set policies that benefit the Chinese and not the American people. That's a very serious crime, as Gaylord pointed out. Trump was impeached on completely bogus, made-up charges. So let's get. I know. I shouldn't have gone that long.
No. Wait, real quick. Linnea showed up in the comments, and I said, "Oh, Linnea, if you want to join us, I'll send you the link." Sent her the link. Here she is, Linnea Lukin. Forgot what her title is because usually I have to write it down, and it's 45 words long. But she is a energy environment person, research fellow for the. That's right, for the Climate and Environment Center here at the Heartland Institute. Linnea, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for shooting me an invite there. I hope I don't derail anything too badly.
No, I was going to invite you yesterday, but I was just like, you know what? I heard that she wasn't feeling too well after the benefit dinner, and I know she'll probably do Climate Change Roundtable on Friday, so I'll give her a break. But if you're, willing to join us, I'm always happy to have you on. So, Linnea, just to catch you up, we've been talking about the potential impending impeachment proceedings in regards to Joe Biden and whether or not they're justified, whether or not you think they're going to go anywhere. Do you have any comments on this topic?
Well, I don't know. I kind of like the theory that it's GOPE and the Democrats working together on this one. I really do. It is hard to imagine a world in which Biden runs for another term and makes it through another term. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of him like passing away or something, but look at the state of him now. Look at that speech that he just gave. Every time he gets in front of a camera, he has this amazing word salad that's really only beaten out by Kamala Harris in terms of how undecipherable it is.
They're a match made in heaven.
Like
they really
CIA code breakers to figure out what this administration is saying at any point in time. And if my voice sounds off, it is because I was sick earlier in the week and I'm recovering from that. But no, I think that of all presidents that we've lately had, or at least in my lifetime, he probably deserves impeachment more than any of the others, just because of his corruption. But more than impeachment, he shouldn't have been elected in the first place. If they hadn't buried that Hunter Biden laptop story, I really don't think that he would be sitting in the White House right now. If people were aware of the full extent of that family's corruption. I mean, we've got so many people in government right now that have these like generational, let's say, international dealings that are getting a little bit out of hand here. And yeah, I would like to see anyone pay any kind of price for those activities.
Right. Seriously.
But I'm not really holding my breath that it'll work out. I think they're just going to ditch him. And unfortunately for all of us, I really am leaning towards the theory that they're going to trot out Gavin Newsom. At the Heartland Institute, it's kind of unthinkable that he might be popular because he is probably the one of, if not the worst governors in the United States. Policy-wise, California is crashing and burning, and we all know that. But he's also younger, and some people seem to think that he has some kind of a charisma. I think it's kind of a Norman Bates kind of charisma, but I guess we'll have to see how it works out. But I have seen that idea floated around, and I don't think that it lacks merit, at least.
Chris, before you jump in, I know you want to say something, but
How do you know?
Linnea started off talking about the state of Biden, which we do have another clip, and Jim spent time putting this together, so we got to play it. Go ahead and play that second Biden clip. Will you please?
And look, nobody likes having celebrated international meetings if you don't know what you want at the meeting. If you don't have a game plan. He may have a game plan. He just hasn't shared it with me. But I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to go to bed.
This is unbelievable. It's still going, everyone that's audio-only listeners.
We talked about at the conference overall. We talked about stability. We talked about making sure that the third world, the Southern Hemisphere had access to change it, had access. It wasn't confrontational at all. He came up to me.
Thank you, everybody. This ends the press conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
The video is still going. How often is the president just cut off in mid-sentence like that?
Never.
And then Jim says the White House feed stops, but his presence on the stage continues.
I've raised it with every person I've met with.
Mr. President, are you worried about your son being indicted, Mr. President?
And he staggers off the stage. Just something else that we are witnessing here. And yeah, to assume that he's going to go through a whole nother general election campaign, he's going to go through a whole series of debates against whoever the Republican nominee ends up being.
Connie, but here's the thing. So yeah, we don't think that he's qualified to run for a second term. But instead of using impeachment to get rid of him, why don't we use the ballot box to get rid of him? That's all I'm saying. I do not want to make impeachment a tool that just anyone uses whenever they just want to try to get rid of the president. That to me is a recipe for a long-term disaster. That's all I'm saying.
Freest and fairest election ever, part 2.
Yeah, but that's conflating. but that's conflating different issues. Yes, we need to have a free and fair election. Yeah, we do. But that doesn't mean that we need to resort to these kind of, tactics in order to try to win, because then you're saying we here's the ends and we'll do whatever it takes to get to that end. I refuse to live by that. I try to live by, here's the principle. I'm going to abide by that principle. I know that those are two different things. And I know that politics is really dirty. And I know that in politics, a lot of times the ends do justify the means, because that's what these people are willing to do. However, I'm not gonna personally support that, because I think that then then I'm being a hypocrite, and then I'm contradicting myself, because every time that I complain about when one side does something that is unconstitutional or that literally does actually threaten democracy, well, they're doing it, so now we got to do it even more. I refuse to go down that path. Sorry.
I stand on the principle that impeachment is there to remove corrupt criminal presidents from office. The left and the Democrats applied no standard at all. They did not apply that standard to get rid of Trump. They hated Trump. I was seeing this morning on Twitter people sharing headlines from all across the mainstream media, including one that was published literally 19 minutes after Trump was inaugurated, that said the Trump impeachment drive begins. I am sorry, Chris. I am not going to stand by on the principle of not punishing criminal presidents because I didn't like the way it was done to Trump. I'm not going to stand in that place anymore. So you and I are no longer friends. I don't want to speak to you anymore.
Does this mean I don't have to buy you lunch at the barbecue spot?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the last barbecue
Awesome.
you can. No, but look, he enriched his family based on his position in government. The guy has no skills.
But he did that as
a politician.
But he did that as
29 years
but he
old.
did that as vice president, and then in the few years after he was out of office. So to me, in terms of everything that I can see about the impeachment process,
so he should be rewarded by not having any charges brought against him in any way.
No, I'm not saying that.
Let him get away with it, Chris.
I'm not
and
saying
you're going to let every other politician get away with it now too, because if you don't impeach Joe Biden, and I have no illusions that they'd actually vote him out of office.
But I think that's sort of a false.
If you don't impeach him for these crimes, you are encouraging more of these sorts of crimes that are already rampant across our government.
All right. I like the debates. It's sometimes we get into this little groove where we're all supporting the same thing, and this policy being proposed by so and so is bad. So I like the little heated conversation.
I'm not soft. I have very thick skin. So random guy. Sorry,
the reason Linnea came on the podcast is she could hear me shouting all the way down in South Carolina without even watching the live stream. That's
right.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so the White House is obviously doing everything they can to run interference against this. The White House is reportedly sending letters to media outlets urging them to, quote, ramp up their scrutiny over the impeachment inquiry. In the letter, White House spokesman Ian Sams wrote, "It's time for the media to ramp up its scrutiny of House Republicans for opening an impeachment inquiry based on lies. Covering impeachment as a process story, Republicans say X, but White House says Y, is a disservice to the American public who relies on the independent press to hold those in power accountable." Jim, is it normal for the White House to tell the media how they should cover stories involving a potential impeachment of the president? And let me be clear, this isn't a spokesman tweeting or commenting something off the cuff. This was a formally delivered message to the media. What's your reaction to this story?
My reaction to that is that this must be pretty serious, because the White House would normally just assume that their lapdogs in what we used to call the mainstream media would do this without prompting. If they have to send out an explicit memo and deliver it on a piece of paper to these journalists to make sure that they carry the water for the White House, then that tells me that the White House is actually very worried about this. And why they're worried about it, Chris, is because these are serious, actual crimes, along with being just run-of-the-mill impeachable offenses. So, but I am actually, the one thing I am pleasantly surprised about was that it was Politico who I think first published this memo. So there must be at least one reporter at Politico who was insulted that they would be handed so explicitly the talking points and the angles they must take on their stories. I think. Right. I think the White House stepped on a rake with this one.
Donnie, just one other thing that just came to me, and I'm not using this as the justification to not pursue impeachment, but I would caution those who are all in on impeachment. This could come back to bite the Republicans, because how is the mainstream media going to portray this? They're going to portray this as those evil MAGA Republicans are going after, poor Joe and poor Hunter. So it's not as if this is actually going to be, wow, the mainstream media is saying, guess what? They uncovered all these reports and all these, all these instances of the Bidens doing all this stuff. Here's what's most likely going to happen, because I watch the mainstream media and I know how they operate. They're going to flip it as these are those crazy MAGA conservative right-wing conspiracy nutcases who are so desperate because they know President Biden's going to win again that they have to try to impeach him. So you know what? That's actually how it's going to go, and it's actually probably going to be. Well, I know, but you also. But
they do that anyway.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to also be somewhat pragmatic in the situation and say, let's get away from all the stupid politics stuff. let's say, you know what, we're about a year out from a very, very, probably the most significant election in my lifetime. And we've got to focus like a hawk on policies and just hit the economy, because that's what the voters care about. The voters don't care about impeachment. They don't care about this, Washington, D.C. kabuki theater. They don't care about that. They care about what is impacting them. And I think that just takes the Republicans off messaging. And Jim, I think you would agree with this. For the last 20 years or so, the Republicans have been terrible at messaging, especially when it comes to the
20
economy.
years.
Probably
like 40 years.
I would say Ronald Reagan was a pretty damn good communicator and messenger.
That was 40 years ago.
Right. Well, yeah, but he was actually president from 80 to 88. So that was, 30 years ago. But all 35. I'm saying is okay.
You're old, Chris. Just get over it.
Speak for yourself. I'm young at heart, man. But you stop trying to get me off my game here. You know what I'm saying. And Jim, come on, you got to admit the Republicans need to focus like a laser on the economy, getting the economy back on track. That's what the American people care about. Bidenomics is a complete and utter train wreck for the American people. And if we just, if we're distracted by these, stupid political shenanigans in Washington, D.C. that have no chance in hell of ever actually resulting in a conviction and him getting thrown out of office, what is the point? Like, what is the point? I'm sorry. Can you please tell me what the point is?
Are you trying to trigger me? Are you doing all this just because Justin is on vacation? You're doing this. You're filling in for him. I think the Republicans can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think you can hold the president accountable for his criminal activity with his son to enrich his family, setting up 20 LLCs to launder money from foreign governments, many of them enemies of the United States, to enrich yourself and your family. There should not be an LLC in your granddaughter's name. She doesn't have she's not old enough to have a job. And yet you're using your family to enrich yourself, to fund with corrupt foreign money. Chris, if you don't want to have any accountability for that at all.
No, it's not that I don't want accountability. It's that I don't think that this is the proper channel in which to get that accountability. Here's to me how accountability should be gotten. It should be gotten when the election of 2024 is decided, and if and when the president is elected, they clean house at the DOJ, say goodbye to Garland, say goodbye to Christopher Wray at FBI, and say now we're actually going to go and pursue these allegations, and we're going to pursue them in a neutral manner. So instead of using impeachment, which is not supposed to be used for this kind of stuff, I would much rather have it. Okay, well, I mean.
I'm tired of hearing it shouldn't be used. You know what? You're right, Chris. It shouldn't be used for this sort of thing. But it was already used for that.
Yeah, but wrong.
And just to get on the Republican messaging, it's like, it's kind of hard to get your message out there and to set the narrative when the entirety of the media characterizes every single modest public policy proposal you have as killing children, throwing grandmas off cliffs, starving people, ruining the environment. It's extremely hard to get your message out there when everything you propose is framed in this way by our corrupt media. Come on. So again,
here we are a couple of weeks from another budget, showdown. We've got a $33 trillion national debt. Our GDP to debt ratio is 130%. This is completely unsustainable. Our grandchildren and generations to come are going to pay for this, and I think that it's incumbent upon us to be the big boys in the room and actually address the issues that need to be addressed. It seems to me that it's very obvious that the Democrats don't want to even address those issues. I would be much happier if the Republicans were say we're not going to play petty politics anymore. We're really going to talk about the issues that affect American people. The border, Ukraine, economics, that kind of stuff, and say, because they only have so much political capital to spend. Jim, you know this. You can't you can't have an impeachment inquiry and impeachment proceedings while also having the time and resources to do all those other things. So I think that they're kind of falling into a trap here, and I think it would be stupid to go down this trap. I agree with you that President Biden has engaged in a whole bunch of shady stuff. From his days as VP to when he wasn't VP to maybe even when he's in office, for all I know. However, I'm just saying I think that it would be a better political calculation for so many reasons at this point to say the voters have already said that they don't want us to go down that road. Let's focus on the things that are impacting them, inflation and all that kind of energy.
Jim, Chris, you've spoken enough. I want to say one thing. I'm going to let Linnea have the last word on this, and then I want to move on to our last topic. Davos watch, but I understand Chris's perspective. I think that he's coming from like your, swing voter type of perspective or whatever. But I think there's
exactly.
No. You said you had enough. I said you
No,
had
no,
enough
but
words.
no.
Keep it quiet. But I think there is plenty of people, staunch Republican conservatives, they're just going to sit here and be like, I cannot believe like they're just going to let Biden get away with everything that we've heard about in the last however long of time. And then they'll become completely disenfranchised because it just seems like you've got another case where Republicans aren't doing anything. So I think I could kind of see it on both ways. I don't want you to comment, Chris. Linnea, I'm giving you the final words on any of this. What do you think about the fierce debate that just happened? Chris, you're muted. I can see you're talking. Stop it. Go ahead, Linnea.
Well, Chris is right that a lot of this is kabuki theater, especially when, the very serious issues are going on that barely anyone is talking about, which is that right now NASA is talking about aliens again. And all of us are wasting our time on this impeachment nonsense and all this Biden committing crimes nonsense and the economy, whatever, when, the DOD is going to insist to us that we spend time watching C-SPAN again so that we can hear them talk in vague terms about UAPs for an hour. So that's my final say.
Perfect. That's a perfect way to end it. All right. Well, I got Davos Watch. I'm going to do that. I want to get your guys' comments on this story that I have for you. But let's get that maybe 2 weeks in a row. We can get that bumper music working properly. All right, welcome to episode 4 of Davos Watch, where we keep an eye on the global elites from Davos to the UN and all the other advocates of global fascism and totalitarian technocracy. This week, our story comes to my attention from the White House itself. It's a press release titled Fact Sheet. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi host leaders on partnership for global infrastructure and investment. So as some of you know, and others surely won't, the 2023 G20 summit took place over the weekend in New Delhi, India. The G20, or Group of 20, is an international forum of economic cooperation and policy coordination composed of the world's major economies. It was established in the late 90s. The countries represented include the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, India, Germany, Brazil, a whole bunch of European countries, and historically China. And I say historically because Xi Jinping was not in attendance this year, but more on that later. At these usual annual G20 meetings, leaders and representatives of their respective countries talk about various issues and often outline or strike up agreements on the issues that have a global impact in scope and measure. These can relate to global financial stability, responses to financial crises, trade issues, and most notably, especially in the last several years, climate change. And this year, there were a couple, quote unquote, achievements touted by the G20. One of them was reforms to the World Bank, because now, under the leadership of World Bank President Ajay Banga, who is the former CEO of MasterCard, who also attended the original launch event for the Great Reset and appointed to his position at the World Bank chief by President Biden. Under his leadership, the World Bank will now be expanding its mission to include issues such as climate change and pandemics. That sounds good, doesn't it, folks? Also, progress on climate change was supposedly made. The member countries have agreed to triple their renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, a goal that will require $40 trillion a year, apparently. But most interesting aspect of this year's G20 summit was the advancement of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure, or PGI. So the Partnership for Global Infrastructure is a rebrand of a plan launched 2 years ago at a G7 summit called Build Back Better World. This was a project that was promoted by Joe Biden. It was a take on his Build Back Better domestic policies, but Build Back Better World, or as it's now called, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure, is a plan to funnel investments into scaling up, quote unquote, high quality infrastructure projects and develop economic corridors in low and middle income countries. Leaders of this initiative suggest that these actions will, quote, enable inclusive and sustainable growth and promote economic activity and prosperity in Asia and Africa and around the world. So at the G20 summit, President Biden made a series of announcements pertaining to the PGI, which are outlined in the fact sheet that I mentioned at the beginning of this segment. The first one is the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. The intention of this is to connect India to Europe with the creation of a new rail line and modernizing their existing ports. Also, they want to connect the two continents to commercial hubs and facilitate the development and the export of clean energy products. Also, to strengthen trade and manufacturing synergies in the two countries. Development of the Labido, I don't know how to pronounce that, corridor in Africa. This is creating a rail line in Africa connecting Zambia and the Congo to a port in Angola. This is to expand, this is their words, not mine. This is to expand the export possibilities for critical minerals needed for electric vehicles. And a whole series of other investments around the world. $425 million to financing a solar company in India to produce solar cells. Other investments in India for firms to build battery storage and other green energy technologies. $50 million to India to a pharmaceutical company to create a manufacturing plant. Modernizing ports in El Salvador, enhancing supply chains in Mozambique, and building transportation systems in the Philippines. So this is where it gets really interesting. To our extremely advanced listeners, these sorts of deals and plans outlined under this Partnership for Global Infrastructure may seem a little familiar to you. And the reason for that is that the PGI, formerly known as the Build Back Better World program, was modeled after China's Belt and Road Initiative. So China's Belt and Road Initiative is a major component of Xi Jinping's foreign policy agenda. It is an ambitious infrastructure project which seeks to link China to countries throughout Asia, Europe, Africa, and Oceania. How do you say that? Say it for me. Oceania? I don't know. The Belt and Road Initiative has allowed China to establish itself as a stronger regional power, giving China more geopolitical influence. Also, the partnership established under the Belt and Road Initiative grants China access to critical mineral resources throughout the world. China basically goes into a developing country, offers to build up all their infrastructure, build ports and railways, and in return, they gain access to valuable resources. So critics of China's Belt and Road Initiative equate it to modern-day colonization, a blatant exploitation of the country's natural resources, and some even accuse China of luring countries into debt traps where they'll be stuck paying off loans to China forever. Regardless of how nefarious you want to paint this, the Belt and Road Initiative is an ingenious plan to expand the power and influence of China. And the US and the West, seeing the success of the Belt and Road Initiative, wanted to get into the game as well. So they created Build Back Better World, or now as it's called, Partnership for Global Infrastructure. And this isn't just my conjecture here. I have the quotes to back it up. President Biden, after the launch of the Build Back Better World, said, quote, "What's happening is that China has its Belt and Road Initiative, and we think that there's a much more equitable way to provide for the needs of countries around the world." Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor prior to the summit where PGI was relaunched, said, Biden will be launching a partnership for global infrastructure, physical health, and digital infrastructure that we think can provide an alternative to what the Chinese are offering, to the tune of tens and ultimately hundreds of billions of dollars when you add to what our G7 partners are going to do as well. So I have a few more quotes from other experts that talk about the PGI and the Belt and Road Initiative in the same breath. But now I'm not saying that the United States is trying to achieve the same goals with the Partnership for Global Infrastructure that the Chinese are trying to achieve with their Belt and Road Initiative, but they are. So there's just that. So I believe what we got here is a global economic battle that is shaping up. This looks to me, and granted, I'm no geopolitical expert by any means, but this looks like to me as banner rallying. China is trying to expand their sphere of influence as far and wide as possible and not to be left behind. The United States is doing the same thing, using the same types of strategies. And to this, the seemingly growing tension behind the US and China over Taiwan and Russia that's going on, I feel like we've got some real trouble brewing. And like I mentioned earlier on, Xi Jinping did not attend this year's G20, and this in itself ruffled some feathers. John Feiner, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, told reporters at the summit, quote, "It's incumbent upon the Chinese government to explain why its leader would or would not participate." Feiner continued, "Some have speculated China's absence indicated that it's giving up on the G20 and building an alternative world order, that it will privilege groupings like the BRICS." So this is the situation that we find ourselves in. And these are the plans that are being rolled out by the ruling elites in places like G20 and Davos. And remember, like I say at the end of all of these segments, that these ambitious plans and global organizations are incredibly well connected and incredibly influential. And oftentimes, the things that they say and do go largely ignored, and they go ignored at our own peril. We've discussed numerous times on this podcast that the infrastructure for ESG and the Great Reset was constructed right under our noses, but people weren't paying attention to Davos, so it went largely ignored. And that is why I've started Davos Watch, where every week I intend to shine a light on some elements of the global elites, and I hope that you stay tuned so that you can stay informed. So, Chris, I'm going to go to you first. Let's see. You gotta get unmuted there. You're out of the penalty box. But what are your thoughts on this story? G20, Belt and Road Initiative, and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure.
Oh, geez. I mean, you laid out a lot there. So China has been obviously doing its Belt and Road Initiative for a couple decades. Donnie, one thing that I do want to, like, one specific thing I want to talk about there is, and you didn't mention this, they're doing it for naval bases, especially, on the coast of Africa, and especially in, the Southeast China Sea, where they are trying to just establish that they are the number one preeminent superpower. Instead of the United States trying to compete with them in a giveaway for funding and infrastructure, which is likely just going to go to corrupt leaders who are going to use it for their own personal piggy banks, I would much rather have the United States try to go in there and say, we're going to negotiate free trade agreements, because that is the best way for a up and coming developing nation to become prosperous, for us to engage in free, fair, and open trade. The United States, when we just plow billions of dollars in foreign aid, that doesn't work. That hasn't worked. We've seen that, time and time and time again. So I mean, I think that China is, and I've read a couple of books on this, that China is all in on their Belt and Road Initiative. And like you said, it is a debt trap. They only use Chinese labor. And a lot of these countries are actually, after the infrastructure, whether it's, a train rail or, a giant new port system or whatever, after that's built, the people in that country are actually really, really angry with China. So there's a growing resentment in the countries in which China has gone into and already, implemented their Belt and Road policy. So I think that this is an opportunity for the United States to say, because there's still a lot of developing countries, especially in Africa and in, some of the poorer parts of Southeast Asia, who are open to forming alliances and partnerships. And right now, in the Cold War, post-Cold War era, from the end of World War II until 1991, when the Soviet Union, disappeared off the face of the earth, the United States and the Soviet Union were basically embroiled in the same sort of Cold War. The Soviet Union tried to go in and set up communist regimes through guerrilla warfare and coups, and the United States tried to, block that. We're now in a very different, paradigm. in the 21st century, it's all, I think, going to be about economic assistance and trying to promote economic partnerships. China is all in on BRICS. They're trying to do their digital currency. They're trying to supplant the West as the preeminent military and economic superpower. And I think that we need to definitely see that that is, on the horizon, and we need to do everything we can to blunt that. But I don't think that we want to go down the path that China's going down with these giant infrastructure boondoggles. I think we want to definitely say, we want you, the country, to become prosperous. We want to, promote democracy, there, but don't do it by just pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars, into those corrupt countries, because a lot of times that does not get to the people. It goes to the leader. They use that for palaces and, keep their corrupt regimes in place. So I think we are definitely in a brave new world. And it's going to be incumbent upon the United States and, presidents in the next coming years to try to navigate this and to make sure that we do maintain our Western alliances, especially with Western Europe and, key nations in Africa and India. India is going to be so key. India and China are arch rivals. They've been our rivals for thousands of years. We need to bring India into our orbit. And in order to do that, I think we need to develop strong economic ties with them. And I think that it's important to do that through free and fair trade, not through infrastructure, boondoggle programs.
Yeah, Linnea, the whole point of my Davos Watch segment is to pay attention to what all these world leaders routinely going on these trips and going to these conferences and discussing and striking up deals. And they do this with like hardly even a mention in the media about it. Like this G20 summit, I feel like if I didn't bring it up and start talking about it on here, no one would even have known that it happened. So what's your take on this? Do you agree with me that not enough attention is paid to this? Or, do you think this is just more kind of theatrics on the part of these world leaders going to these places?
Well, one, I wouldn't say it's theatrics, because I think that they mean to have, these kind of eloquent clips taken and used in the media when they give their public talks, but it's not. Some of the most absurd things that we have clips of that we show on Heartland Institute programs have come out of these conferences, but it's not so much the public talks, the little like keynote speeches that they give that are concerning to me. It's when they sit down for meals and are hanging out and shooting the breeze together, or after these keynotes and stuff, when they go out to dinner. Those are the times, I think, when some real kind of, people are always making the comments about smoke-filled rooms and the basements of expensive hotels and stuff. And I think really that is some of the power here. And the reason why people don't talk about the G20 and Davos stuff all that much in general is because it is kind of a snooze fest for the most part. It's kind of rare that you get those, like the Jane Goodall clip about wanting to reduce the population to what it was in like the Middle Ages or even earlier, that kind of thing. You don't get those all that often. Usually it's kind of, boilerplate global socialist stuff, which is bad, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to get people outraged. But, as Chris said, what these guys are doing is something totally different than, it's not exploitation to go to a poorer country or a developing country and set up trade with them for natural resources that they have. But it is exploitative to go in and get them stuck in a debt trap of some kind, or to pay banks or to encourage banks to not invest in fossil fuel projects that they want to start up in those other countries, or in mining projects, until, of course, they become convenient for, the powers that be, whether it be China or some new Western desire to get extra lithium or whatever it happens to be. Sorry, I am losing my voice here. That's exploitation. That's abusing these countries for their resources and not letting them develop. And it's not even just that, we dump aid on them and it doesn't work. It doesn't work if you take them at face value for what they're claiming the purpose of dumping aid on them is. If you look at dumping aid into these countries and you say, well, the purpose is to lift them out of poverty, then it doesn't work. But if the purpose is something else, if the purpose is the result that we have, which is that these countries have, they're basically beholden to Western countries or to China to help them to stay with their heads above water. If that's, and it's kind of dark, but if that's the goal, then it's a success.
Yeah.
I couldn't say worse things about these G20 people.
But before 2000, when China entered the World Trade Organization, they were just a third world, backwards developing nation themselves. But we did engage in trade with them for 20 years, but we didn't do it on a free and fair level. Look what they've become. I would rather the United States say, okay, China, like you have, you have violated our trade agreements time and time again. We're done, trading with you. We're done building factories there. Build those factories in Latin America, South America, and Africa. There is lots of labor. There are lots of natural resources, and that would, tie them with us, economically, and it would put China in a big, big hole. So, I mean, that to me is kind of the common sense move in this situation. However, I don't know if that's going to happen, especially with, Biden in the White House. Yeah, I think we should impeach him personally.
It's come around. I think Jim has cooled off. We gave him a little break. I think he's cooled off, but I don't know. Me talking about the kind of the machinations of these globalists at these international conferences may have reheated them. Not entirely.
I can see the steam coming from it.
So, Jim, take us home. We're already 16 minutes late in the podcast, but what do you have to say about this kind of G20 stuff that I was just laying out for us all?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out that it's Oceania. So the fact that you couldn't say that properly proves that you are not AI or AI assisted as a host. So
you're lucky that yes, that's okay.
100%
I was almost muting you, but yes, you make a good point. Go ahead.
Yes. and second, I used to, when I was a journalist, I covered for the Washington Times. I actually went to some of these international confabs. I went to a NATO summit. I went to a G20 summit. Went to one, I forget which one it was, in South America, in Chile. It was pretty cool. It's nice to travel the world like that. But as Linnea says, they are kind of snooze fests. And I always wondered, what really is going on? What is the real value of these things as far as international relations go? But what strikes me, Donnie, when you're laying all of this out there, is how in the past, and even before I was covering this stuff as a journalist, but back in the 80s when these major summits were going on and the Soviet Union was still around, it was basically a gathering of how to leverage free market capitalism to help continue to enrich the West, with the understanding that the socialist Eastern Bloc would eventually collapse under the incompetence of its own system. But it seems to me now these gatherings are much more socialist in nature. They look to the rise of China, which has taken oppressive communist society, kept the oppression and the political system in place, but embraced money. I'm reluctant to even call it really capitalism, but they basically have exploited Western capitalism to enrich themselves and to empower their government. And I think there's too many governments and leaders, especially in organizations like the World Economic Forum, that don't look to China as a problem, but as a model. And they want, all of these discussions are about centrally planned, controlled, and directed societies and economics, basically. And so we can create commerce if we build this infrastructure. Instead of seeing if there's a real market for that, or letting the market handle it in a legitimate way. It's all this command and control stuff. Again, China can do that because it's basically a closed society in many ways, and they're doing it basically in their own country and then the countries from which they have a lot of influence. But again, to get to what Linnea was saying, what they don't want, they have to control and command the economies if they're going to impose their green agenda. Because if you allowed developing countries to develop and use the energy systems that they see fit, the energy systems that enrich the West in the first place, like coal and natural gas, that would be a threat to the system and would certainly just scuttle any kind of Green New Deal stuff. So, I'll take these summits seriously when the global leaders of the West, who are demanding that the United States, for instance, lead the world in destroying our economy by wrecking our entire energy system. I'll get serious about this and take them seriously when they apply those rules to China, which they are not doing, of course. And so it seems to me the entire purpose of these things is to diminish the traditional economic and military powers of the West and to enrich and empower, the more socialist rivals in the what Trump would call the third world. It's not Trump, but Biden would call the third world, but we're not supposed to say that anymore.
Yes. I've said about the Great Reset that I feel like that's just the West's attempt at kind of creating that command economy that is predominant in China. And this partnership for global infrastructure is 100% just trying to model itself after China's Belt and Road Initiative. So all the terrible stuff, and we have the quotes too of Justin Trudeau basically saying, oh yeah, I wish we could do stuff more like China when it came to COVID or whatever. I feel like that is absolutely the case, and these are what these people are talking about at these summits, and I'm going to continue to shine a light on it as much as possible in every weekly segment of Davos Watch. But you hear the music. That means we are done with the show. I want to thank you all for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, A, leave a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. And B, join us where we are live streaming this content on video live at noon Central Time on YouTube and Rumble and Twitter and Facebook, and join the conversation. Throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, you could help us out by just hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All these things break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Linnea Lucan, same question.
Come watch us tomorrow at noon Central on the Climate Change Roundtable on the Heartland Institute Facebook, or not Facebook. Well, I guess it's on Facebook too, but on their YouTube page, not the Stopping Socialism page, because we kicked them out because Jim kept trying to get the whole channel shut down.
That's true. That's true. Chris, what do you have to pitch today?
Heartland.org and stoppingsocialism.com.
Fantastic. All right, man, a few words. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You said...
Oh, Biden.